Sonia's Song by Sonia Korn-Grimani. Chapter 2. Baby Steps and Goose Steps. The Nazi regime fostered Heini and me throughout our formative years. She dragged us roughly by the hand, prodding us when our limbs were too short to move at her pace, when our experience was too limited to understand her cruel motivations. She was the monster under our beds, the stuff of our unending nightmares. Although we were children, we never tasted the unfettered innocence of childhood. In January 1933, just as my toddler's gait steadied, Hitler became Chancellor of Germany and began his steady consolidation of power. On April 1st of the same year, he called for a boycott of Jewish businesses, which, though brief, marked the start of the transfer of any remaining economic control that the Jews had to the Germans. At first, this Aryanization was quasi-voluntary, but the use of widespread propaganda discouraging patronage of Jewish businesses and occasional shows of force left no doubt that Jews would be forced to abandon their commercial holdings. In September of 1935, the Nuremberg laws were passed at a special session of the Reichstag, the German National Assembly, and soon after proclaimed to cheering crowds during the annual Nazi Party rally. The first of these laws allowed only Germans or related peoples to hold German citizenship. This law applied directly to our family, as my father, who had become naturalized German citizen, became stateless. The second aimed to keep Aryan blood from defilement by prohibiting marriages and intimate relations between Jews and Aryans. These laws legitimized anti-Semitic campaigns in social context, which up to this point had lacked uniformity of focus. Hitler continued to publicly express the anti-Semitic sentiments that many Germans held. They appear in his landmark book Mein Kampf, written during his 1924 imprisonment after a failed attempt to wrest control of the country in 1923. According to Hitler, German Jews were a foreign subhuman race who threatened the underpinnings of Austrian German culture and economy and took advantage away from more deserving Aryans. He found receptive ears among disenchanted and economically deprived Germans and advanced his venomous theories to increasingly wider audiences of all classes. Establishing the conflict along racial lines also played into the theory of eugenics, then in vogue. It favored sterilizing or eliminating all those with physical or mental disabilities in the belief that doing so would lead to a utopian society populated only by the fittest, smartest, and most attractive of individuals. These are the facts of the matter. Far more difficult to assess were the effects that these gradual but steadily tightening policies against the Jews had on our family. As children, Heine and I absorbed the tension that permeated our household and propelled us toward an early adulthood. For my parents, however, the build-up of Nazi strength drove a wedge between two loving adults who, under normal circumstances, would have relished the bonds of a deep commitment throughout many years of married life. As I reflect these many years later, safely removed in both time and space, it is perfectly clear how outside circumstances can tear even the most solid relationships to pieces. The only basic question remaining unanswered is why people may respond very differently to indications of impending doom. What can cause two plants, each grown from seeds and tended lovingly, to evolve in vastly different manners when transplanted side by side? Why does one healthy specimen continue to grow and bloom, while another seemingly as hardy withers and finally shrivels up? I think of this metaphor often when it comes to assessing my parents' differing responses to their stressful years in Germany. Both were transplants from their native soil, both endowed with talents and attributes that would seem to destine them for success in coping with whatever difficulties fate had to offer. Yet once life went awry, my mother first raged against the injustice of her circumstances, then soon after became determined to face and conquer each new challenge. My father, on the other hand, was quickly overwhelmed by the hopelessness of the situation, while at the same time denying the possibility that it could get worse. He insisted irrationally that Hitler's regime and its attendant anti-Semitism were a passing phase of mass hysteria. His passivity led to a depression, a withering of soul that sapped his energy and left him incapable of combating the blows being rained down on us by the increasingly powerful Nazi regime. Occasionally, my parents were able to rekindle the sparks that had originally brought them together. My father's first passion was writing and books. I remember him drawing up a chair near her while she ironed in the kitchen, his beautiful deep voice resonating in the intimacy of their small shared space, reading from some of their favorite literature, bringing to life passages from Schiller, Goethe, or Heinrich Heine. On other occasions, he would entertain her with stories from his past or from his imagination. During these times of unspoken truths, they allowed themselves a reprieve from the outside world and created the impression of a contented and harmonious couple. I treasure these rare glimpses of what their union might have been and have incorporated their love of literature into the core of my being. But far more often, debate raged between my parents. My father could never accept that the civilized and intelligent society he believed he lived in could long tolerate the leadership of such an immoral, evil being as Hitler. On this basic premise, he dismissed my mother's growing concerns, refusing to assist her in any preparation for a future that acknowledged the actual danger we were facing. Withdrawing into his own private anguish, he left my mother, a woman in her early to mid-20s, to manage our even dwindling financial resources, to make all the contacts and devise the strategies which would ultimately direct the course of our lives. This probably explains why so many of the conversations I recall from this era emanate from my mother. My father seemed almost an unwilling bystander to our plight. Too late did he finally understand the gravity of our situation and the dangers that surrounded us. Coming to terms with what the Germans he had so admired were capable of completely broke his spirit. His mood became perpetually grave, and he teetered on the brink of a nervous breakdown. How humiliating for him as the head of the household to be deprived of his livelihood. He scrambled as best he could to make ends meet, but our situation crumbled despite his efforts. What in ordinary time would have been parental reserve gave way to bouts of ill temper alternating with seclusion. Above all, fear became the driving emotion of his life. In his belated attempt to keep us safe, he insisted on our perpetual need to be quiet and not draw attention to ourselves, lest some neighbor report us to the authorities. These measures seemed totally ineffectual against the might of Hitler's arm of well-trained soldiers whom we often observed from our window as they goose-stepped in the streets. One of the earliest memories I have of my father is that of his fanatical orderliness in regard to Heine and me. In the years before public places became forbidden to Jews, whenever he escorted us to the park, he became enraged if we scuffed or got dirt on our shoes while walking along or playing. It was as though we were the only elements within his power in a world spinning out of control. We inadvertently became the focus of his anger at the way our lives were evolving. And as the tensions in our lives increased, so did his irrational approach to our desperate situation. I don't hold it against him now, but I do feel sad that my brother and I rarely saw the better side of our father's nature, and sad that he himself would never know what his life could have been if only he had been allowed to impose his own order upon it.
You've been listening to the second chapter of Sonia's Song, written by Sonia Korn-Grimani, read by the author. Sonia's Song is published by Grouse Press. More information about her beautiful memoir can be found on the web at claygrouse.com/Sonia's-song.